Darragh McKeon, welcome to the Creative Souls of Clare podcast. Can you please help me out with something? I can never pronounce the name of the place that you live.
It's a good name. It's called Fahalun up the Moor.
You see why?
It's like a vocal warm-up exercise if you just say that about five
One,
times in a
I'll
row.
have one more go at it. Fahalak Amor. No. It's not going to happen.
Fahalun.
It's not going
I
to
have
happen.
talked to a few Irish speakers and they have no idea what it means.
They've no idea what it means. Wow. So situate us for listeners and viewers of where in the world you are and what's around you and how you ended up there.
So I'm on the west coast of Clare. This being the West of Clare podcast. I'm between Ina and Milltown. It's kind of what you imagine Ireland to look like if you've never been to Ireland. So if you see like the picture postcard stuff, that's kind of it. It's stone walls, lots of white horses, donkeys, rain, kind of rolling hills. And then you drive kind of 5 minutes, 10 minutes down the road and you get massive ocean waves. Like it's just, yeah, it's kind of an extreme and beautifully epic place.
And obviously this is you're able to kind of within recent memory contrast this with a very different environment and moving essentially home to Ireland from New York. So that must be, is that still with you, that kind of unpacking and processing the contrast?
Yeah. So I was in New York for 5 years and before that I was in London for 5 years. And it takes a little bit of time before you begin to really understand the immigrant experience. And I think some of that is about you forgetting. I mean, not so much that you're forgetting what it is to be Irish, but you're forgetting the things that make you Irish. And so I would find myself a lot like in my apartment in New York, thinking about skies and Offaly, because I'm from Offaly originally, like really longing for Offaly skies. And some of that was a light thing. Like you don't really get starlight in New York because the light spill is just too heavy. But just clouds, like just the landscape of the sky, I really missed. So I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that all the time.
And does that give you a new sense of appreciation for what perhaps some of us take for granted?
I think it gives me appreciation for the stuff that I took for granted.
Yeah.
Like for example, I was at a trad session maybe about 6 months after I came back. And, like we've been to them, like it's a group of people sitting around in a circle playing music. But I think before I left, I had always just thought that that's music. Like that's just notes that people are playing. But like once you go away and you come back, you understand that like there's something about that music that arises from a particular place and landscape and history and culture. So all of the kind of like under the soil stuff becomes really apparent when you leave and come back, I think. Yeah, I'm really like the landscape. I still haven't got bored of it, like, and I don't think I will. Like it's just so resonant, it's resonant of place and people, and feels like, to the extent that if I'm the way when you get off a flight and maybe you're in a foreign country, like you immediately get that sense of foreignness, like everything looks slightly different. Whereas when I come here, everything looks really familiar. And that's very like satisfying. Yeah.
And if you take yourself back to writing as an experience in New York and writing now, how much, if any, of an influence does landscape and place have for you, do you think, perhaps in terms of practice or influence?
Like visual memory, I think I'm finding that like the things that I can write about are actually relatively limited because my visual memory isn't very deep. And actually linguistic and verbal memory, it's deep in Ireland, but like in other places, it's very not. So like, for example, I'm writing a book at the moment. I had to write a chapter about walking around Chicago. I used to live in Chicago when I was 23. I lived there for a year. And like, I just couldn't remember anything. Like because the landscape hadn't, it just hadn't, I hadn't spent enough time there that it embedded itself in my consciousness. So with your recall and with your memory, there's just not enough there for you to like really kind of pull out. Whereas, because I spent my childhood in Ireland, and I do think it's a childhood thing, that stuff that resonates you know, that's like planted in your brain very, very early. So like you never lose those kind of images, that kind of imagery.
So you've obviously spent a lot of your life in cities, but you're a rural man. And how much of a rural man are you?
I think I'm a bit of both, actually. You know, stuff that I'm realizing now, actually, having left big cities. Like when I was in New York, is particularly because New York is very stratified. I found it really weird that people were into. I mean, I'm going to use the example of types of wine, but like you can kind of use it for anything. Like whatever there is, there are people
Yeah,
who are aficionados in it. So
yeah,
like your house plant in the background, there's some people in New York who like will be able to tell you what that is, what the quality of that particular house plant is, blah blah blah. Whereas I feel like in the countryside, or certainly here, we're a lot more general because things are so less specific. Because tastes are less refined because we're kind of broader. Like we're, you know, we're making do with what we have. A, and then B, people have like a greater range of things that they're able to talk about and are interested in, but not that kind of specificity. So that's really interesting. I quite like that about a city. Like I kind of get it that people have like favorite restaurants in the city because actually they're living lives that are so refined that like any small thing they're able to kind of pick up on the nuances, whereas
yeah.
different in the country.
Do you think there's a certain irony in that, it can, obviously we all want to follow our noses towards whatever art, music, culture that we love and enjoy, but there's something that in that might prevent the diversity of experience happening, in that it can essentially lead to silos, perhaps.
Yeah, it can, but you can also jump from silo to silo, which is
Oh, are you a silo jumper?
silo jumper. I don't like doors being closed. I like to kick open whatever doors there are.
Yeah,
So
but you're
like,
obviously you're obviously aware of silos. Often when people are in silos, they're not even conscious of the fact that they've gone down one particular rabbit hole.
yeah, and that's a travel thing, I would say, as much as
Yeah,
anything else.
yeah,
I would say it's much rarer for someone who's traveled a lot to feel that because you are aware that you just have one little particular narrow
yeah,
existence.
yeah. So take me back to childhood and Offaly, and what was that like for you, and what were some of the formative influences or formative influential people, perhaps?
Um, I mean, I suppose the kind of great, that's really, I mean, it's such a big question. Um, a really big artistic influence. We had a guy, there was a guy living down the road from me. So I grew up just outside Tullamore. Um, we had a farm, but we didn't actually live on it because we'd moved from Dublin when I was very small, 2 or 3. So we lived in this kind of suburban bungalow. But my dad was farming every day. And so I kind of feel like I was on the cusp of like town life and like proper like bogger life. Um, and anyway, there was a guy who lived near us, maybe 3 or 4 miles away, who was an artist. He was called Mark O'Neill, and he was from Manchester originally, and was like painting in a farmhouse down the road, and had kind of made the transition from being an illustrator to just like an out and out painter. Um, and so I mean, he was a huge influence because he'd have like these art classes in his house on a Friday, and it was proper artist cottage. It was like
Oh,
covered in
wow.
art books, kind of bits of paint everywhere. Like it was like when you imagine an artist cottage, it was kind of that. He didn't have a separate studio, so you were kind of like hanging in his cottage. Um, and so he was doing classes in like the local school in the evenings. I think 2 evenings a week. Eventually, he moved it to his gaff. So I was in like this art class when I was like 10, maybe 11. And there was some nippers in the class, like there were 6 and 7 year olds, and then there was me. I mean, I was one of the older. There was like 11 and 12-year-old. So that was from like I think 6 to 8 on a Friday, and then he would do like a pre-portfolio class or a portfolio class for like leaving cert kids
Okay.
students, and that would be from 8 to midnight on a Friday. So that would follow us immediately. So
Wow.
I'm jump when I was really small. I was about 12, 13. I made the jump into the portfolio class. So I was like this 12-year-old hanging with like, these guys from Tullamore and women from Tullamore like wanted to go to art school. So we had this little soiree on a Friday evening from like 8 to 12. And they were drinking and they were bringing in their own music and we were painting. And like, that was a revelation to me. I had no idea, A, that you could live like that, and B, that's what that looks like. So after you do that, it's really hard to go back. Like, you're kind of like, okay, that's, being an artist is a life and it's a cool one. So like, yeah, I mean, that kind of taught me a lot about just creating and viewing and being visual and yeah. So
that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
So is this kind of quasi awfully Bohemia?
Totally. I mean, it was awfully Bohemia. I think that was it.
Yeah.
He moved when I was about, I really thought like, I was like, great, I'm going to do this all the way through secondary school. I'll build up a portfolio at our college. But he moved away when I was about, I think 14 maybe. So that kind of put a spanner in the works, because after he left, I was like, okay, like, where else can I go? And like, that was it. There wasn't anything else in Offaly really, like, of that kind of, with that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah. Did you ever hear from him again or hear of him?
Yeah, he became like a really successful painter. He lives in Wexford. We haven't been in touch in years. I should hit him up. But he, like, during the Celtic Tiger, he was one of the first people to, I think the Curling Gallery in Dublin is the name, but he was basically one of the first artists to, like, he'd release an exhibition at auction. So yeah, he's doing well. He's caning it.
It's amazing. And then, is this something that your family encouraged, or was it embraced as a kind of venture and a path?
I was quite like, so it was my mum who was sending me to art classes, and like, I was really good. Like, it was kind of really apparent quite quickly that I was like really good at it. And it was kind of, I have 3 older brothers, so it was one of those things that, like, I suppose I just felt like they couldn't slag me off about it. I was like, this is my thing. None of you guys can do it. So that kind of became my thing. And like, I started winning awards for it. And so, I mean, they certainly didn't encourage me towards art college, but like, they were definitely, you know, like, I kind of became known as the painter guy in my town. Like, I definitely became known as like,
okay,
that's the kid who can do that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And then were you having the typical teenage experience as well, you know, in terms of whatever that might have looked like, whether it be sport, music, you know, substances, romance, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, ish. Like, I was pretty quiet. I did play a lot of sport. The school that I went to was like, I think it was like 280 students or something. Like, it was really small.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we didn't, like, substances wise, there wasn't really a lot around, man. Like, you know, I'm writing about this a little bit at the moment, the book that I'm working on, but like, and I'm sure it's the same for you. Like, I feel like our teenage years were closer to the 50s than they were to the like early 2000s, because they were pre-internet. They were, you know, we just didn't have access to very much.
Well, there were certainly like liquid substances.
Yeah, there were liquid substances. Yeah, I was pretty quiet.
Okay, yeah. But that obviously, I mean, I'm kind of a believer that often that culture, which definitely was very pervasive in my town. You know, there was 30 pubs for a population of 2,000 people or something, whatever that ratio is. It's kind of fairly extreme, and you know, it was almost the norm, a rites of passage to start going out and binge drinking at 15, 16. But I also feel like those are the years that, you know, you may be embarking on a different direction or a different passion, and it could get clouded in alcohol or otherwise. So it's a kind of it's an amazing thing that, you know, those seeds were planted for you. And it strikes me as well, they weren't through like a typical education setting. It was very much a community setting.
Totally. Yeah. I might well have rejected them if they were in like typical education.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really like, drink became a thing like in my 20s. But yeah, at that age, I was pretty disciplined. Like, I was kind of like, I was on the rugby team, and like, made it like a point that like anytime we were in training and we had like a fitness thing, like, I wanted to be like, you know, first. So like, I was like a really fit kid. So I think there was a bit of that, and then there was a bit of like, concentrating on my art. My parents kept it pretty tight as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose, yeah, I just, it's not, it didn't kick in for me.
Yeah. And was farm life an influence for you as well?
Not really. Not really, other than I think I probably spent the best part of my childhood on the farm. But it wasn't because we didn't live on it. We didn't. It's not like we had goats and
Yeah.
chickens.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Nothing like we weren't really fostering anything. Like my dad had a beef herd. He had cereal when I was like really young. I think he gave it up. Oh no, actually, he would have had it when I was a teenager as
Yeah.
well. But it was kind of his thing, and I'd go and help him out on it every now and
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
We weren't really part of that
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
So I happen to know that you ended up in Letterfrack. I'm just wondering, when did that happen and how did that happen? And it wasn't the Letterfrack we know in a historical sense,
yeah,
which is an entirely different experience, sadly, for people.
although it was that building.
Yeah.
Same,
Where yeah,
there was
the
a,
industrial school. Yeah.
uh, well, so a teenager, I was like painting a lot. I went to UCD and did English and sociology. And then my mate he like knew someone in Chicago with the bar. So we were like straight out of college. We were like, okay, let's go to Chicago for the summer. And I think we still had a J1 at that time. So we went to the bar in Chicago. He left, I stayed on. And then I ended up working. I started doing a bit of theater in college and was pretty into it actually. So I started working for Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago, which is kind of one of the main, it's where like John Malkovich came from, and like Gary Sinise, who's the guy in like Forrest Gump. So it was kind of one of the main independent theaters in the States. So I was an intern in the production department. And I was kind of there for a year, and I was like, actually, I don't really want to stay in Chicago. But I was looking at the people around me who had like qualifications, and I was like, oh, they're like qualified in like very tangible things. Like some of them, there's a couple of electricians who were like working on the lights, and there was carpenters. So I was like, I think I want to do something tangible. I was really done with academia. I didn't really want to plunge into the theater world in Dublin because I was like, I don't know what that looks like, A, and B, I kind of want to, like, I suppose it was the very responsible like thing of going have something to fall back on. So I did, like, I ended up signing up for like a furniture production course in Letterfrack. Although I think a lot of that was just an excuse to buy myself time to write. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to go there, tell people that I'm doing this course, but actually like write on the side.
Okay. So had you written much before this? Nothing. Okay, but you felt the call, the pen was calling you, or
a bit, yeah. Like I was a big reader. I suppose I felt like I wanted to write. Yeah.
Okay, so did this happen? Did writing start for you in Connemara in Letterfrack?
Yeah. I think I'd spent a summer in Paris when I was like 21. So maybe I think it kind of started there, but like Letterfrack, I began to take it a little bit more seriously. Like I didn't write that much. I think I wrote like 2 short stories while I was there.
Yeah.
But I was beginning to get into a rhythm. Like I was properly reading there. I'm like properly reading in a like, let's figure out how to write a book kind of reading rather than just pleasure reading. Yeah. Which is kind of weird being back here because I feel like it's a little bit full circle. Like the thing that I started, because Connemara is quite like it's quite similar to Clare in terms of landscape. It's not unfamiliar. So being back here is kind of squaring that circle in some ways.
Is there a lot of would you say there's a lot of drive or ambition underpinning a lot of these moves? Because it sounded me like a hell of a lot of focus and determination going on at a relatively young age.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think of it in those terms, but like, yeah, like I didn't really know any other, like I just didn't know how to do it. And I was kind of reading writers, like Don DeLillo was a big writer for me. And when you hear DeLillo talk about his early years writing, he was like, I found a room, I gave up my job, and I just did it. And so I was kind of like, I think that's how you do it. Like later realized that that's not really how most people go about it. But like, because I just didn't know anyone and didn't really know how to go about it. I was like, I think that's the thing that you got to do. So that's kind of what I did. Like,
Is there a certain intensity to that?
oh, super intense. Yeah, super intense. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
would you say you're an intense person, or were an intense person in general?
Yeah, like I think I only realized it after I finished my book, and started meeting other writers, and I was like, yeah, like you need a lot of propulsion. Like I wrote a book about Chernobyl, which is a huge international event that everybody knows about. Wrote about the end of the Soviet Union. I'd never been, I'd never even published a short story. So like, I think I needed a hell of a lot of propulsion to like get that off the ground. And I think I did that with just sitting down and hitting it with intensity. And I don't think that was naive. Like, I think at the time I was aware that
Yeah.
like you were going to have to dig pretty deep to be able to pull it off. Like, yeah.
And do you think that there was compromises or sacrifices in your life in order to allow that intensity in, that you had to sort of lose out on other things, or there's
Yeah, like I have a mate, I have a friend who's a twin, and she says like people ask her what it's like being a twin, and she's like, "Well, I don't know. I don't know what it's like."
you don't know other way. Yeah.
So like, I don't know what I missed. I don't think I missed out on anything. Like I
Yeah.
didn't become like socially reclusive.
Yeah. So did you maintain that? Were you still a relatively affable and sociable guy, or did you turn into this kind of intense rocket man?
I mean, I don't know. Like you'd have to ask other people around me. Like,
Well, I'm about to beam in some special guests.
you like Darragh, the people you met at the time. I think I was pretty, yeah. Like, I'm going to generalize, but I do think it's true. There is something about like certainly white men in their 20s. I think because we're certainly Irish men, because we're not very emotionally fluent. I think there's like there's an intensity that comes from like trying to release that maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I did. What was I going to say? Yeah, go on.
So let's just talk for a moment about that emotional fluency, and what do you think's going on there, and why is that?
In terms of our emotional fluency?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're speaking in very general terms, but if you're saying that white men specifically, or lads in their 20s specifically, have some perhaps distortion or blockages around emotional expression, then, I mean, obviously we can only mainly speak from our own experiences, but what for you do you think is the blockage, or why isn't there more fluency?
I mean, I think for our generation, we were so dominated by the church, and our parents were so dominated by the church that, there are some good aspects that come out of that, but some of the aspects that come out of that are a reverence for authority, a lack of, I suppose that, I mean, the essential Catholicism thing is listen to your elder, listen to your priest, listen to your archbishop, don't form opinions of your own, don't interpret the Bible on your own, so it's that the entire kind of
dogma,
or the dogma. I suppose I think it engages. It doesn't, there's a certain amount of coercive control in the idea of not allowing people to think for themselves or speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Out of intuition. So that's hard to burst. That's hard to burst.
And do you think writing for you kind of lubricated the emotional realm?
I honestly think I had to study emotion like someone studies physics. Like I had to.
Okay, and what did that look like?
I mean, it just looked like reading novels and just going, like, it's only kind of in the maybe last 5 to 10 years that I've started reading novels and begun to trace the emotional trajectory. Because previously I would like look at landscape or look at the kind of visual trajectory or look at the structure of it. But yeah, like genuinely, I think I had to learn emotion from books. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't think I'm alone in that, but like, and if you're going to do it, like, that is actually quite a good way of doing it. Like, it is the beauty of the novel, because you really sit within somebody else's psyche.
Yeah.
And like, you really trace that line. You can be a woman in like Victorian England, or you know, so you can
Yeah.
really get in on those experiences. Yeah.
So can you talk to me about the experience of taking on your first book and what your practice was like, and what were your days like, and how long did it take?
Took a while. I didn't really have a practice.
Okay.
I don't think I was even aware of that that was a word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was theater directing, so in my 20s. So when I came back around the same time as Letterfrack, I started directing some theater in Dublin. And I was probably doing that. I was directing in UCD as well. I was doing theater directing there. So by the time I hit about 25, 26, I was beginning to pick up some work in Dublin. And that, I feel like that kind of freed me a little bit as a writer to be like, okay, you're stepping into the realm of like hanging with artists. Like you can also step into the realm of beginning to write. So some of the, like my very early days, I was working with a company called Rough Magic in Dublin. Like at the very, very start of the book, they'd allow me to use their offices in the evening. So I'd kind of often work with them during the day, or like do some other money job and then sit in their office for like 3 or 4 hours in an evening. So I did that for a little bit. That just gave me, I mean, only a couple of months, but it gave me a little bit of like lift off. And then I remember like specifically I was working as an assistant director on one of the shows, and then I go to the library in Trinity pretty much every evening. Like it was pretty, I was kind of like, okay, like this is a big subject. You got to take this pretty seriously. Then later I moved to London. It was very sporadic. Like I was kind of writing, not very consistently. I moved to London. I was kind of writing a bit more when I was in London. And then I hit a point, I was getting this guy, a guy called Jocelyn Clark, who is a dramaturg. I think now he does a lot of work with the Arts Council, but at the time he was the literary manager in the Abbey. So I approached him and was like, here, I have these pages, like, can you sit with me and like talk me through them? And we did a couple of rounds of that, which was really, really beneficial. Just even giving me permission to be like, okay, I'm actually writing a book. Like we're taking this seriously. But after about maybe the third meeting, he was like, yeah, you're not, this isn't good enough. Like you gotta, like, do you want to do this or not? Like you gotta actually sit down and commit to this and do it. So at that point I was living in London. So at that point I stopped directing and I was just like, okay, I'm going to get a room again, shut the door and just do it. So that was the kind of the key. Like I've just been like,
yeah,
I'm going to take away all excuses and kind of most distractions. And now you just got to lay it out.
Wow. It really reminds me of a book I read a few times actually called The War of Art. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it just talks about creativity in general. But one of the guy's premises, I think he's Stephen Presserfield or something Presserfield, but he just talks about the difference between being an amateur and a professional, and it's not that one is better than the other. It's just what you want to be. And you have to sort of make that choice if you want to go at it. Because and I use the word about, excuses. I find that myself all the time. Like we'll always find excuses. Do you want to do it or do you not want to do it? Get into the ring there.
Yeah. I have a thing. I had a thought a few years ago, and I think it's true. Like there's a relationship, there's a really strong relationship between beauty and consequence. And I remember Paul Auster, excuse me, writing about Philippe Petit, and so Philippe Petit is the tightrope walker who walked between the Twin Towers in New York. And Paul Auster saying that actually the beauty of the act is directly proportional to the consequence of the act. That we know that if this goes wrong, this guy dies. And there is something very elevating about that. So there is something about being a professional where you go, this has to work. And that there's something about that infuses the work, absorbs that. Because it matters. Like it doesn't really matter to anyone else, but it really matters to me because I got to put bread on the table. And if, even the book that I'm writing now, like if it doesn't work, I have no idea what else I'm going to do, but I do think you need to walk that line. You need to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, I can identify with some of that. Yeah. So the book started in Dublin. continued in London and then presumably continued on further in New York.
No, I pretty much finished it in London.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. Like I did that room thing for a couple of years, and then I actually ended up getting a job. I was, at a certain point that you're going to get burned out at that, and I needed a little bit more stability. So I ended up getting a job, and so kind of worked 2 days a week, and then I got enough of a salary from that I could like write in the evenings and write full time 3 days a week. So so I finished it there. Yeah.
Do you have any particular thoughts around creativity, the creative life, the arts, and income and finance, and how to travel that road of viability or livelihood?
I think it's really important to be broke, like to really know what that is and get comfortable with that. Because like I think in general, probably in life, this is a good rule, but like I do think it's really good for artists. Like you've got to be comfortable with the worst case scenario. And then or get as close to that as you can and then work your way up, because then you've nothing to fear. Like a mutual friend of ours, I've been hanging around with surfers since I've been in Lahinch, and like if you're a pro surfer, I remember talking to one, like speaking to one of them one time, he said like he thinks his pituitary gland is actually just, he thinks he's used it all up. Like he doesn't really have adrenaline anymore, because he's kind of used up all of the adrenaline from being in like life and death situations so much. And so there is something about like, it's not that you become numb to fear, but like you stop fearing fear, you stop, there's something about like treading that line of going like, okay, how bad could this get? That you just don't really have very far to fall anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets hard. It gets harder. That's a universal truth. It gets harder with like a mortgage and responsibilities for someone who like puts themselves in that situation. It's much harder to take those kind of risks, especially as you get older, because you've taken on those responsibilities. But if you've never taken them on, there's not all that far to fall. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm struck by that notion of just being grounded in the reality of the situation, and that can be actually life affirming in itself. It's not that we want to kind of glorify it, and
not at all. Like I'm not trying to mysticize it at all. I'm just kind of there's just something valuable in understanding what is the bare minimum that you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a lot of cases, and certainly for me, it's really not much.
Yeah.
So, I know that if everything goes like turned on its head, I have that experience of like, for example, I have a theater director friend in London he's gone on to be really successful, but he like really grounded out until his 40s with a wife and kids. And so now that like lockdown is happening and, all of the kind of certainties that he had around, or potential certainties that he had around money are taken away, he's not that freaked out, because he's like, I know how to do this. I did this before. Like I've kind of built up that muscle of like grinding and just, being resourceful.
Yeah. Yeah. And in many ways, it is a muscle that strengthens resilience, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a muscle in the way that travel is a muscle.
Yeah. What was the experience like of publishing the book, and what followed? Where was your head at, and how did you respond to it all?
I published when I was in London. I mean, it was kind of weird. There were definitely like months, if not a couple of years, where I just didn't expect that I'd get published, but I was just kind of like, I just need to finish and just get this out of my life.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was like one of the things that happened when I got my publishing deal is I had to go back over the book and take out anything that I was just ripping off straight from other people. Like there was some plagiarism happening that I was throwing in, because I was like, it doesn't matter because it's never going to get published.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I actually had to go back and go, oh shit, this is getting published.
Yeah, yeah.
That like isn't mine. So like that, I mean, that was kind of my attitude. Towards the end, I was like, this is probably not going to happen. This is such a stretch, but I'm just going to get it done. So to actually have it cross the line, it was kind of like, felt a little bit inevitable and felt completely unexpected and weird. Yeah.
Wow, that's so. Did you feel like you were ready for? I mean, I think it's fair to say the book was very successful. And do you think you were ready for that? You'd built up the kind of
No, I didn't know how to talk about it. I found it weird that like people were
okay,
asking on loads of subjects, and I was like, I've been in a hole for a few years. I can talk about Chernobyl, but like if you're asking me to be articulate about contemporary events, like I'm not your guy.
yeah, yeah,
That happened quite a lot. Like I'd find myself at like, I'd do like a book reading or whatever. The thing that they don't tell you is you do a book reading and then you go for dinner afterwards with,
oh God, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I know,
Not during a pandemic, you don't, Dara.
but like that was part of the publishing thing that I like didn't understand. And so because I'm kind of the center of the table, people are like asking my opinion on X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, all the wisdom I have is between the pages. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know what to tell you. So that, like, that kind of expectation of, I kind of understand it now a little bit, but
yeah,
like, there is a sense of like, I think when you are a public person, you have a certain fluency and articulacy about whatever is going on. And because I kind of came from nowhere, I didn't have that at all.
yeah,
And it was that expectation was a little weird to me. Yeah.
yeah. And then to be suddenly seen in the realm of success or relative success, I mean, it's a spectrum in itself, but how did that vibe with you?
Yeah, it's not, there was no like getting out of Lexus and like photographers. So like that,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I know, but in a writer's journey, you had arrived at a certain major point.
yeah, I had, but like, it's not a public forum,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you're just back in your room again. It's not like if you're in a band and you hit a certain level of success, you're playing in front of 10,000 people or whatever, it's hard. It's probably hard to come down from that. And it's probably hard to like play the smaller rooms again. But like a writer just goes back to his room. Like that didn't impact me.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, what did it look like for you then to go back into your room? Was it an immediate? Was there a reserve or a new leash of creativity emerging, or did you feel the call, or did you need a break?
I kind of started reading again pretty quickly in the transition between. So I got my publishing deal when I was in London, and then ended up moving to New York. So before the book came out, I had just kind of pitched up in New York. I'd done a bit of travel. So I was kind of ready again to like sit down. I got myself an office, and just, sat and started reading. I think it was a thing that I used to do in theater. A big influence for me was this, there's this Hungarian guy called Arpad Schilling. He has a company called Credicor, and he's in Budapest, and I kind of hung out with him a bit and have really liked his shows. And I remember him saying, like early on in his career, the theater company would decide to do a show and then they do something completely different, because then they wouldn't get stuck in kind of one genre, but also like you're stretching your muscles every time because because you can't really ever figure out what you're doing because all the time you're doing something completely like antithetical. So I remember that. So I was like, okay, when I go to New York, I'm just going to throw out everything I know and really take the engine apart, and start to put it back together. So that like even on a sentence level, like I just sit down and practice writing sentences in totally different ways. Like I very assiduously kind of sat down and did that. Yeah.
So, what was it? When you take apart an engine, how
Yeah.
easy is it to put it back together? Is it it's a risky activity in itself?
It's like a golfer taking apart a swing. Like I definitely. But I kind of did that deliberately. I was like, I'm
Yeah,
gonna really take apart my writing style, like to the extent that like I remember I wrote a short story which hasn't been published, and I haven't really tried to get published, but like I wrote it in these tiny paragraphs and then I printed them out and then I just laid all the pages on the floor and decided what the structure was going to be. So there's like, I really kind of was like, okay, let's like give yourself as much playtime as you want. Because fundamentally that's I just didn't want to fall in the trap, which happens a lot of writers where like they bang out a book and then that's their style. And then they just kind of keep repeating and get really bored.
yeah. what are the other influences in your life that sustain you and help you sort of maintain a balanced, nutritious diet of life?
I mean, I think my 20s was the time to like build up like artistic resources. So now it's like simple stuff like swimming in the ocean and kayaking and go and surfing. Like I feel like I've kind of built up enough of an artistic reservoir that I don't need to. I can replenish it, but I don't need to like constantly keep tapping at it. So yeah, I mean, at this stage, it's just about like finding balance in your life. You know, I'm not like, I try and like do the writing in the room, do some like extraneous reading around it, and then don't give it very much more space.
Mm. And have you thoughts of the future in terms of aspirations, goals, visions, or do you try to just keep it in the day and in the moment?
Yeah, I'm pretty good at keeping it in the moment. I do, like, I've started doing a lot of walking. Walking's become like a proper practice for me in the last maybe 5 to 6 years. So a thing I love about that is like you wake up in the morning, you pitch down wherever you pitch down, and like you can't really plan too far ahead. It's just very kind of steady and consistent, and lead you where it leads you. Like I think the directing thing will come back in because I have 10 years of experience as a director. So that might be in the form of plays or screenplays or whatever. Yeah, I'm a little. You're talking to me. I'm really very close to finishing a massive chunky book, and I feel like I've done like now that I've done 2 in a row. I feel like I'm not going to sit down and write a chunky book again. So I might write a slim book, but I'll probably like spread it out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, brilliant, Darragh. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, and I look forward to reading your slim or your chunky book, or seeing your plays or your movies or wherever the journey might take you next.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Darragh.
See you, man. Thanks a lot.